Welcome to another episode of LERU Talks. My name is Katrien Maes. I'm an engagement ambassador for the League of European Research Universities, and I'm the moderator of this program. Our topic today is ethical dilemmas in biotechnology for health innovation. So that covers a lot of issues. Some of them that we'll talk about today are what ethical considerations researchers make, companies take into account when advances in biotechnology research bring health innovations to the market. How we can foster a culture of ethical and responsible innovation. How citizens' patients' rights, such as privacy, are protected. And what's the role of regulation in this space at various levels, EU or others? So with LERU Talks, we aim to bring together academic and policy worlds closer together by having an academic expert from a LERU university and an expert from the policy world engage with each other. And to discuss today's topic, I'm very pleased to introduce the two experts here with us today. Magda Chlebus is Executive Director of Scientific and Regulatory Affairs at EFPIA, the European Federation of Pharmaceutical Industries and Associations, which represents the R&D-based pharmaceutical industry in Europe. Magda and her team oversee policy and legislative developments that influence the research and the regulatory environments for the healthcare industry in Europe. And Luca Marelli is Associate Professor of Ethics and Governance of Health Research at the Department of Medical Biotechnology and Translational Medicine at the University of Milan. And the University of Milan, of course, is a member of LERU. His interdisciplinary research lies at the intersection of science and technology studies, health policy, research ethics, and the governance of health-related data. Welcome to you both. I'm thrilled to have you with us.
Hello, Katrien, for having us.
Great. And also a warm welcome to our online audience. We cannot see you, but we know you are there. And after the conversation with our guests, there will be time for questions from the audience. Please submit your questions via the Zoom chat function during the discussion. We'll do our best to address as many of the questions as possible. So, without further ado, let's start. First of all, let's talk a little bit about this title of the talk, Ethical Dilemmas in Biotechnology for Health Innovation. That actually covers a broad set of issues, and we have no time to cover not even a lot in 30 minutes. But I want to ask my guests to talk first about, well, what are some front burner issues that we need to talk about? Speaking from your perspective, I'll start with Magda in your work at EFPIA. Could you take us through that, please?
Yes, thank you very much, Katrien, and hello to everybody today. I think it's really a very interesting question because when we talk about ethical dilemmas or ethical challenges in this space of research and development of new health solutions in particular, and you look at the advances of biotechnology, digital sciences, but also societal expectations from environment, privacy, right to know, you name it. It's really important to understand how they actually shape and influence in a positive terms the work, the research and development work. And for me, there are two questions. The one related to robustness of science and insights that we are generating, and ethics is really an integral part of that. And the second is how these ethical aspects are making research and development more patient-centric and the solutions respectful of the person and of society. Now, the real challenge is how do we integrate these considerations throughout the value chain in regulated sectors and with so many rules and regulations that exist today so that they can work together rather than work against each other. How do we make sure that we can create the right checks and balances, the right framework so that the research that we do can follow all of these ethical rules and does not create barriers. I'm speaking here from the point of view of industries that invest in research and development in Europe and do not create barriers. So I think for me today, biology, digitization, societal expectations, how do they work hand in hand with legislation, with processes and institutional rules?
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's already a lot of stuff that we can unpack later in this conversation. I just want to ask Luca to respond and say what matters to him most.
So I think Magda made, I think a great framing of the issues and complexity that we are currently facing, and we'll probably, go through in this conversation. And I just want to kind of again, perhaps highlight some of the challenges that arise at the different levels. So researchers nowadays increasingly are confronted with the kind of major ethical and social challenges which are associated with the rise specifically of novel digital technologies and new experimental practices that they experiment with. And so this is one level of issues that touches upon those that in the field are actually advancing research innovation. But also likewise, regulators and policymakers increasingly are confronted with the difficulties in devising new governance frameworks that cater to a multiplicity of priorities and perspective and try to accommodate this on an equal basis. So think about advancing research and also innovation, ensuring competitiveness of the European data economy, and increasingly in the current geopolitical climate, there are issues that revolve around digital and data sovereignty, priorities that are linked to that. All the while, while trying to ensure that regulation are, ethically sound and socially robust, that cater to the people, that at the very end of the innovation pipeline are those that should benefit from this innovation. And again, in this broader context, we shouldn't forget those broader issues that our societies are confronted with. So in a context where especially the power to reshape the future of health systems increasingly seem to move away from the established centers of democratic decision making and increasingly concentrate in the hands of very few powerful actors who are able to spearhead new lines of research, new technologies, and new innovations. So I think we have a lot of complexity to disentangle, I have to say, in this conversation, and I'm sure we'll go at least through some of these issues in the following hour. And it's a pleasure to kind of have this discussion today.
Mm-hmm. Would you say that both of you, ethical issues are forgotten or not treated well or not early enough? Or, what specifically is it about ethical dilemmas in terms of the complexity of all the different things that you have mentioned?
I don't know about whether they are forgotten or not treated enough. I find ethical dimensions quite present in European policymaking. In particular, take EHDS or AI or even biotechnology in today's conversations. I think the question is how are they integrated, and to what extent are they integrated in the processes, and do they need to be regulated or do they need to be implemented? I think that's the question that I always have. Without good ethics, you don't have good science. Without good science, you don't have good innovation. And without good innovation, you don't have impacts for society. And all of these things actually connect together. And I think that a lot of legislation stemmed, like EHDS, from privacy and protection of people. And that is, for me, one of the examples which show that ethics is not forgotten. The question is, how can we implement it in the way that it enables both protection of people and support to innovation?
Mm-hmm. Luca, I mean, this is your research specialty, so, but taking yourself out of it, do you think that for researchers, this is a challenge? Is it part of their work, or should it be like, how do they implement this on a day-to-day basis in the research that they do? I mean, I'm also thinking ahead of, for instance, the European health data space, which we'll talk about in a minute. Are researchers aware of this? Can they navigate this space?
So I think it's perhaps a broader consideration, but which I think applies also specifically to the European health data space. I think researchers are increasingly faced with the difficulty of complying with this regulation, and specifically with regard to the HDS, what we are seeing is that it's a sort of what we might call a sort of selective visibility, meaning this is a very hot topic, widely debated, in among expert circles, especially in the Brussels area. But it's something in which we see there's not I would say, a sufficient level of awareness, even among stakeholders and researchers, that are those that will be made to apply the HDS, and in a way will bear the consequences of this regulation. So I think this is definitely something on which effort should be should be done to have, first of all, a broader debate on these issues and on regulations such as the HDS specifically. Also, insofar as I really do think that the upstream engagement of stakeholders, researchers, and various type of actors will be key for the success of these regulatory and legislative initiatives. So it's important that we take on board their perspective, from as early on as possible, and that they perspectives can contribute to shaping, the final outcome of this, for instance, this policy or other kind of initiative.
Mhm.
So yes, that would be my kind of
Mhm.
reaction to.
Okay, we've kind of fallen into a topic that we wanted to broach anyway, the EHDS, the European Health Data Space. So let me just backtrack a little bit for our listeners who may or who may not be familiar with it. It's about health data and how they are stored, used, researched, reused, what access, who has access, when is access given, and how, and so on. There's lots of ethical reflections to be made on how this is organized. So the EHDS is the European Union's attempt to come to a common European framework for the use and exchange of electronic health data across the EU. So, hoping to enhance individuals' access to, control over their personal electronic health data, and also enabling data to be reused for whether it's public interest, for policy support, and of course for scientific research purposes. The regulation, it's been translated into a regulation which has entered into force earlier this year. But that's not the end of it. We could probably say it's rather the beginning of a process that will take years, because implementing acts with detailed rules and specifications will come our way to help put this regulation into practice. So it's sure to have real life consequences for all of us, as citizens, as patients, as researchers, as pharmaceutical companies, and so on. And there are a number of ethical reflections to be made in this regard. So, Luca, I've said it before, you have done quite a lot of research on this recently. Where do you see the ethical issues that need to be dealt with around the rollout of the EHDS in the next few years?
Well, there are many ethical issues. So let me just, first of all, stress one point, which I think is important, because the HDS provide this overarching kind of normative architecture, but actually a lot of key details, as Katrien, you were just alluding, are going to be defined in the implementing acts. So I think this is a good moment to have this conversation, because a lot of key details are basically yet to be defined. So we still don't know what is the final shape the HDS will take. And again, I would like to stress first what we already start introducing, which is like the public debate dimension around the HDS, because I think that this is something that should be fostered as well, along with stakeholder engagement. My fear is that there is very few awareness. If you talk to people, is basically, is a kind of forgotten kind of item, the HDS. And my fear is that having a delayed public debate on the HDS, first of all, might, elicit kind of resistance down the road. So just imagine 5 years from now, a sensationalist article come out, and there's, talks about, okay, European citizens' very sensitive data are being shared to Google, to kind of make one example. And if it's like dealt in that way, it might actually hinder the acceptability of the HDS, and that might become like a stumbling block towards the full realization of the HDS. So I think first point that I want to take home is that I think it's important to have now, a debate as broad as possible, as inclusive as possible on this important piece of legislation that will affect all our lives as, kind of researchers, innovators, and European citizens. Second point, maybe that I would like to point out as a key ethical point is the concern the fee system, because the HDS will actually make data available upon fee system, and I think it's crucial that the fee systems that will be implemented in the different member states will actually be able to balance the different interests at stake. So we have the interests of the data holders, so that's collect the data users who try to get access to the data through the HDS, and ultimately of European societies. So maybe a couple of points in that regard that it might be worth stressing is that I think it's important that preferential access for public research is strengthened. So in the regulation, in the current guidelines that TEDAS2, the joint initiative of the European Commission, has just basically issued, there's mentioned preferential pricing for researchers, so to facilitate for public researchers to facilitate access for public research institution. However, the implementation of this is discretionary. Thereby, I think that it would be important, for instance, to set an EU baseline that would prevent national divergence and make sure that researchers across Europe, who have maybe also less flexibility than pharma company in their arrangements when it comes to budgeting, may actually have ease of access to facilitate to get access to the data. And I think this would be very important. Also, I think.
Can I interrupt you, Luca?
Definitely.
Just to say, you mentioned companies for as opposed to preferential fee systems for research. I would just like Magda to ask her what her take on this is.
I don't think we've had really big discussions about it in EFPIA. It's clear that you pay to play when using certain services, etc. I think that what Luca says about a system that is more unified and more predictable and provides better legal certainty is much better for everybody. So if there was a conversation about defragmentation and harmonization of rules, anything that brings legal certainty and acceleration, I think is important. And definitely having a system that is more aligned across Europe is helpful in whatever sphere, whether it's a fee system, whether it's authorization system. If people know what's expected from them, what process to follow, that creates a better traction.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, definitely legal certainty is important to all of us working in this space, whether you're a researcher, a university, a company, and so on. Luca, back to you.
Yes, I mean, speaking about harmonization, I think another crucial element, is opt-out, which is an issue where member states again retain flexibility in designing and implementing the mechanism with as much granularity as they deem appropriate. So just to clarify, the HDS will basically foresee data use, secondary uses of data for research and innovation by default. But as a fundamental safeguard, an opt-out mechanism was basically introduced at the last minute in a way to protect kind of individual autonomy. But this mechanism, the details of these mechanisms will be left again to member states to determine. So it could be that member states opt for a full opt-out or opt-out of specific data types or opt-out from specific data uses. So the risk here, which I see, which I can envisage, is that if the HDS was in a way framed as a kind of a response to the fragmentation issue that Magda mentioned. So we risk having a situation in which, again, we end up with having a kind of a fragmented landscape on that, again, throughout Europe. And which would actually kind of weaken, I think, one of the main raison d'être for the HDS. And also with relate to that, if I may, I think it's important that when devising an opt-out system, information to citizens is kind of conveyed in as a transparent, as clear, and as accessible manner as possible. For instance, it might be important to clarify that when, if citizens opt out from data uses within the HDS, they are not opting out from other type of secondary uses of the data, as the HDS does not replace current data sharing mechanisms that are in place. So there is basically secondary use of data also outside of the HDS. And it's important that these issues are clarified again, so that there is informed decision that could be made from the part of citizens, and we kind of safeguard this fundamental kind of ethical safeguard, which is like the right to opt out.
Yeah, that kind of leads me into our next issue, which is around public domain debate and society about information as opposed to disinformation or misinformation. But before we get into that, I want to go back to Magda and see if she has any comments on what Luca just said.
Yes, and I don't think that we are far apart or that we are apart at all, because what Luca just said just resonates, and that it's absolutely true. I'd like to add to it another perspective, is that the society expects from innovators to provide solutions that are trustworthy and that are robust and solid, based on the best possible evidence, and that includes also data. There are many of those solutions that do require a lot of data today across different countries. If we look at, conducting clinical research on certain types of diseases, you absolutely must do that across multiple countries. And sometimes when you cannot find the patients, you need to get those data from what they are, and that means in health systems. I think that the opt-out system, while really a good safeguard for privacy and for people and citizens, and empowers them to make decisions about how their information is being used, at the same time, this other societal expectation that we would, as innovators, deliver the best possible solutions based on the best evidence available, is also to be in the balance. So how do we create a system in which, as Lucas said, information is clear, the system is understood by citizens, their rights and obligations are understood? Because I, as a citizen, I'm not sure that, and I concur with Luca, that I've heard enough about it, that I know what my rights and obligations are, that I understand the opt-out. I'm not sure about that, and I'm not one of those, I'm one of those who are the closest probably to the legislation. So I think that absolutely needs to be done. But on the other hand, we also need to look at things like consent and opt-out and their implications. What does it mean? So to understand why this system had been put in place in the first place, let's not forget also about the objective. The objective was to support better healthcare delivery for individual patients, and with secondary use of data to enable better development of better solutions for the society, while also directly benefiting the individual patients who provide their data. So if we want to weigh all of these considerations together, here we come with a real dilemma, which is protection of individuals and their rights, and the protection of society, and the right of society to have the best possible interventions based on the best possible evidence.
Yeah, I'd like us to lead that into our sort of societal discussion. But first of all, I want to ask Luca if you have something to add to that.
No, I think this is just the complexity that I mentioned
Yeah.
at the beginning, that actually, what it means to do ethical research or ethical, legislation, in today's context is to cater to different priorities. How you balance these different priorities is not straightforward. And of course, I guess that's the complexity that we are facing in our, in our current times.
Yeah.
And it's about who's going to benefit, how we create value, what is value in the end that is going to be generated by initiatives such as the HDS are important questions that I think, should
Yeah.
be foregrounded.
Yeah. During this last 5 or 10 minutes, what we've been talking, I keep thinking of when we had the COVID pandemic and the development of vaccines and all of that. I mean, obviously there are, there was vaccine hesitancy. There was the way the public discourse was held with citizens and with patients and so on. Have you learned anything from that? Maybe it's a bad example. Maybe you want to give another example. But what I'm trying to get at is, can the public discourse and the public involvement, public engagement be improved so that it leads to a proper consideration of ethical principles in the biotech-driven health innovations? Magda, do you want to take a first stab at that?
Yes, I can. And I think we are right in the middle of that, considering all the announcements at the global level, in the US, what's happening about vaccines and autism, and then the communication back in the EU, which I think the EU institutions are very acting very responsibly in actually engaging in this conversation and communicating. So did we learn? So I think we didn't learn enough. We still operate in our own bubbles and we are not communicating enough. There is not enough debate about it in the public domain. About science, the why we are doing science, how we are doing science, all you hear, it's headlines. It's headlines with negative news. That's all you hear because this is how news work. And I think that we really miss a good quality comprehensive discussion and communication from the scientists to the society about what they do, how they do it, and to engage in a conversation not only with their own bubble but also with everybody else. I really think that if Europe can do something better, it's doing right that, to engage more and to communicate more. The other thing is about consultations. Sometimes we have the impression that because we have launched a written consultation on a piece of legislation, that is enough, that citizens would just come, tell their views, and then the policymakers would know everything. That does not replace the debate and the communication. And I think that as scientists and researchers from public and private sectors, we hold part of the responsibility for not doing enough. And it's really time for us to get out there and to be present and to engage.
Mm-hmm. Can I interrupt there to say, talking about telling us your views and engaging in debate, as far as I can tell, there are no questions in the chat yet. So, dear audience, please pose your questions in the chat. We will get to them. No worries, our speakers will go on forever, but we do want to hear from you as well. So please don't hesitate. Please put your questions in the chat. Back to my guests. I guess, Luca, do you have a perspective on this?
Yeah, because I largely subscribe to what Magda just said. I would just add perhaps a complementary piece of perspective to what Magda just said, and that is the fact that too often I think the discourse of misinformation or disinformation places a lot of emphasis on the knowledge dimension. So the idea is that the underlying idea is that so the public lacks knowledge, and that if we provide the public with more knowledge, then there would be less disinformation. So actually, I think there is an extensive body of research in my field in social studies of science that actually has done empirical research on these issues, on, for instance, scientific controversies. And important point to consider is that often, and I think COVID vaccines are a paramount example, the public attitudes towards science are not just only influenced by knowledge issue, but also by normative issues, overtly ethical and normative issues. So by personal values, by personal experiences, by specific trust in specific institutions, the cultural context, even political dynamics. So I think it's important to consider that really problems of knowledge often are normative problems and problems of social and political representation. And if we forget this dimension, I think we are, making an oversimplification of the issue that we are facing. So I think,
What do you mean by oversimplification?
that we are missing
the
an important component of the issue about public attitudes towards science, and we have to be, and I think we have to be attentive to this kind of ethical maybe disagreements that people might have that do not really concern the knowledge dimension of the problem, being COVID vaccine or another kind of biotechnological solution to public health issues, but are problems that are normative in nature. And so I think that this component of the problem should be acknowledged if we have to ameliorate the public debate. And let me just say if I may, one kind of additional consideration, that I actually am worried that in today's political climate, science is too often used across the political spectrum as a way to deepen political polarization. And I'm worried by that because I think, that it's an oversimplification often of problems, of things. And we have, picking up the suggestion that, Magda was making, we have, we should try to promote as a kind of a broader, debate as possible, taking on board the different kind of ethical stances of the different different perspectives that are present in our societies, without really using science as a kind of a way to create divides and reinforce existing political divides. So that is my 2 cents on these very complex issues.
Yeah, it does sound very complex to me because, of course, people have different worldviews, and we do have, very polarizing views out there, don't we? But, people are entitled to their moral values, and we just need to people can reasonably disagree with each other. I guess reasonably and disagree with each other are important ways of talking about this. So I'm sort of looking for the limits or the balance in this.
Well, I think fostering, as Magda was saying, so perhaps on complex issues like an open consultation is not does not exhaust the space for public deliberation, but having kind of an open space for deliberation in which scientists, experts, researchers make their perspective here, convey knowledge in an accessible way, so that then people are also empowered by the knowledge they receive from experts in making decision. So that would be, I think, a way to kind of foster really a culture of inclusive scientific debates in in Europe, without actually having the polarization that we have seen in a kind of conspicuous way, so also in very recent times.
I think there are many negative consequences of not doing that, and this would have implications not only for science, trust in science, but also attractiveness of the scientific work. We already seeing young people sort of divesting from scientific education, and that's something that it's seen across Europe, because this polarization is not making the profession extremely attractive on the one hand. On the other hand, there are also quite big implications for health and health delivery, because public health policies do rely on trust, and this faith and trust that the system actually takes good care of you can't work in a situation where headlines are driving opinions and policies and public health policies in particular, rather than a good conversation. And I also think that we far too often talk to ourselves rather than engaging with everybody and going where people are and trying to meet them where they are and with their opinions. So this, as I said at the beginning in the very first words, we need to burst the bubbles. We need to start really talking to everybody. We are not going to convince everybody, but that's not the point. The point is in having an informed conversation and to see where the limits are and what do we agree to disagree about, because in the end, that's what it is in that type of discussion.
Yeah, I'd be interested in exploring a little bit more about how do you create those open spaces? How do you break through the bubbles? But let's park that one for a little bit, because we are, I do want to get to some practicals in the end, but we are going over time a little bit. I see a few questions have come in. We'll get to those in a minute. But I think we had at least one more issue to go through, and that is the rise of artificial intelligence. I think nowadays you can't have a conversation about anything anymore without saying, well, what is artificial intelligence doing in this space, and what ethical issues in our discussion does the rise of AI bring with it for the health biotech? Luca, could you start on this one?
Do we have 1 more hour for addressing this issue? It's a very complex. So just to be synthetic, maybe, three quick points on that. So I think there's, of course, the well-known issue about the fact that, so AI now is being more and more ubiquitous in the research landscape. And AI models especially, function as amplifiers of the input data on which, they're trained. So I think first issue to consider is the issue of data quality and avoiding use of data which are unrepresentative, incomplete, biased historical data. I think is crucial if we really want to have tools that work and they are supposed to deliver solutions. Then again, in the current geopolitical climate, I think the potential issue related to the dual use biosecurity risk that might be posed by AI models is something that should be accounted for. So AI systems can be used to analyze images to predict protein structure, but can be also used potentially to design pathogens, toxins, or other type of potential biothreats. So again, I would kind of mention this. Now at the systemic, if you want, level, about kind of societal level, one thing that we should also consider is the fact that at the moment, as it is well known, we are witnessing an unprecedented concentration of capabilities in the hands of really few players who are able to dictate the evolution of the field. And this might be an issue, which, by the way, if I may relate this discussion to the discussion we just had with regard to the HDS, it's an issue with regulatory initiative like the HDS might exacerbate, in the sense that with regard to the HDS, for instance, we know that there is this obligation that is being introduced about making data available. So data holders, institutions who hold data across Europe will be requested to make data available, to feed data into the HDS. What, however, is not required is that the AI models that are trained on EHDS data are being, again, made available to the broad research communities. And this, I think, poses two issues that we should be, of which we should be aware. One issue concerns scientific quality. So the AI model, we should consider that AI models increasingly act as important metadata for the data set that they generate, they annotate or analyze. So I think it's, without access to these models, the end result might be that the derived data set that have been analyzed through this model might become hard or impossible even to kind of interpret, reuse, or validate. So I think this is an issue that we should consider in this, in this specific historical period. And then, of course, there is this, if I may just quickly add, Katrien, this paradox whereby the HDS or similar initiatives basically allow technology companies who develop these models to actually access the data to train the models, but there is no symmetric obligation to kind of ensure that the benefits are then fed back to European societies, to researchers and innovators. So I think also this is something that perhaps we might want to consider in the in this current discussion that we are having.
I think these are really interesting points, and especially as AI had been integrated or was being integrated in biopharmaceutical research and development for decades. It's not new. We sometimes have the impression with the buzz around AI that it's something completely new, brand new, had never been done before. It's being done for a very long time, and it's being integrated for a very long time. I must say our sector is probably one of the slowest to integrate these technologies, but was still doing that for a pretty long time. Why am I saying that? First, because there is quite a good experience in doing a lot of these in research development, but also evaluation of files. Regulators are using artificial intelligence to evaluate files. Big announcements in the US again. The AI is also driving health delivery. It's guiding how you deliver medicines, radiotherapy, chemotherapy, what is the right sequence. So there are elements where I agree we need to understand more and to take a risk-based approach, because some of these elements would directly touch the human being and the way that the person is treated or the person is goes through the healthcare systems in assisted, or how the doctor would deliver advice. On the other hand, there are AI that help facilitate and optimize some processes, within the process of R&D that would not have that direct impact. I think we also, I think I'm trying to illustrate the fact that the level of risk might be different, and we also need to make sure that not everything is treated as was at one point a discussion that everything that relates to AI and health should be considered as high risk, strictly regulated, overseen, checked, etc. I think that there are various levels of risks, and there needs to be a conversation about what is well-established use, what is new, what can create potential risks for the patients. And I would say that the return on investment, in a way, and pharmaceutical industry is not a builder of those algorithms, and we are the users. But access to good data would actually deliver better medicines in the end. I think that is the return on investment, that the innovation that would be generated would be better for the patients. So that, I think that would be the point of. There is regulation, and I agree that sometimes regulation at this pan-European level or meta level is not super helpful, but there is also self-regulation and guidance. And I think that technologies like AI advance so quickly, and the perception of them in society is also changing every day, I must say, with more and less acceptance of that we need to use the entire toolkit, the regulation, the self-regulation, the guidance, and the debate in order to make sure that we have it right. And again, on return on investment, the return on investment is the best possible service for the society and the citizen, where the citizen would be the first beneficiary and have some direct return, health return, or well-being return on that data investment.
Okay. Yeah. We wanted to talk a little bit more about regulation, but I think I'm going to have to, we've said already quite a bit now, and I think we have about 17 minutes left. I'm anxious to get to some questions as well. Before I get to the questions, I have two things. Luca, would you like to respond to this last point from Magda? And then afterwards, I'll ask you to kind of try and formulate some practical. We've had very interesting discussions, but I imagine that our listeners also want to have some practical takeaways. Like, what would you do? What do you recommend either citizens or regulators or governments and researchers, companies? Are there any practical takeaways, whether it's on AI, whether it's on open space or the bubbles or whatever? Where do you have those? But first, back to you, Luca.
Yeah. To kind of tie together the two questions that you're asking, Katrien. So I agree with Magda that we shouldn't kind of make AI of a sort of a black box where it's kind of this kind of black and white picture. Is much more nuanced. And in that regard, I think one challenge that I'm kind of seeing from colleagues, from researchers, is that, of course, aside from the pharmaceutical companies, also researchers are increasingly using this AI tool in their day-to-day research, and sometimes they are very skilled, very expert. Sometimes, actually, however, they might not be fully aware of the specific risks that specific usage of the AI tools might entail. So I think here an important advice that might be given is that at the level of research institutions, the guidelines, increasingly specific guidelines, be developed to kind of guide researchers towards a responsible and safe and ethical use of AI. And this might affect, especially when I think about researchers, both the input kind of level and the output level of the use of AI models. So at the input level, for instance, is important. It might sound kind of mundane and trivial, but it's important that users do not are aware of the possible risk and do not actually input identifiable data, unpublished research data, grant proposal data, or IP kind of or confidential kind of project materials, because this might be a kind of problematic uses of AI. But also at the output stage, it's important that then researchers are aware of the possibility of hallucinations, of fabricated citations, IP violations. So all these issues that should be also kind of accounted for when using these tools. So I think a key role here will be made by research institutions to kind of develop guidelines that might help researchers in ethical and responsible use of these technologies.
Okay. Yeah, it's something that I think we're working on a little bit in LERU,
Yeah.
or at least we are discussing, in groups in LERU. So, but a very topical, very important issue. Yeah, back to you, Magda.
I completely agree. I think maybe adding to that, if you look at implementation of legislation like the AI Act, you need to have a constant, continued dialogue between the scientists, the innovators, and the regulators. Because things evolve very quickly. As I said earlier, AI and other technologies, by the way, are really at, the pace of evolution is huge. So it's really important that this dialogue takes place continually, that it translates into guidance. I mean, legislation sometimes creates technology log. Good guidance and good dialogue with the regulators creates regulatory enablers. That's what we need. We want people to be aware through institutional guidelines. When I say institutional, it's at the level of each institution. I completely agree. This needs to happen in public and in private research as well. You need to have the bioethics committees. You need to have all the internal and external controls. All of that is happening already today. We just need to use them again for these new technologies that are coming and to constantly adapt. And this dialogue and co-creation between innovators and regulators, scientists and regulators needs to happen. This is the only way that we can have it right, and the evolution of science can also be accompanied with evolution in guidance that integrate all the ethical principles as well.
Yeah, which sounds like a difficult thing to do, given that this is a space where a lot of things move and change. So this will, will it be outdated soon? Will it need a constant reviewing, you think?
I think the legislation as written today might actually set a framework, but that needs to be filled with a lot of implementing guidance and acts as we go forward. And when I'm talking, for example, about artificial intelligence in medicines, I very much hope that a European agency like, the European Medicines Agency can actually create that space where regulators and innovators can have a conversation because they see both sides of the spectrum, and the scientific community, it's also part of this conversation. So that's just one example, pragmatic example of how the solution could potentially look like.
Okay. I think we've said this word a lot already. Complicated, complex, complex, complex area, complex topic. All right. Actually, let's keep the sort of practical takeaways for last as a closing. But let's go to the questions. And I don't know if my speakers can see the questions with me in the chat, because there are now about 8 of them. And what I would suggest is that I'll just read them to you, and I'll let you pick and choose if you want the ones that you want to answer first, and then we'll see. What we've done in the past also is we save the questions, we give them to the speakers, and if they can respond to them later, we try to facilitate that. But let's have a look at the questions. So, who should be responsible, held accountable for ethics in biotech and health innovation? There are researchers, legislators, clinicians, citizens, and who is responsible for what? That's one. Magda using the term ethical dimensions. I think we're all, doing that. How do you differentiate between an ethical dimension concept from a dilemma? What do you think is the next question about the potential of technologies being developed for medical purposes ending up being used for non-medical purposes? The drugs being used to enhance concentration by students, even if they don't suffer from ADHD or these kinds of problems. What are ethical issues from that point of view? Do we still need to develop these technologies and claim that it's to improve health? And if we consider that's a question of healthcare, are we not extending the definition of health disproportionately? So in this concentration, or is it a question of health? That's a big, important question, I think, yeah. Communication should not only be from experts to people, but also from people to experts. What about people living with a certain medical issue, for example, who in a sense are experts by experience? Could they also play a role outside of a consultation? We sort of touched upon that a little bit, I think, but maybe not enough. There's a parallel discussion going on within FEAM. Is LERU aligned there in order to avoid duplication? Pankras, thanks for a question. To be honest, I don't know, but I will find out. Could you give examples of such new medical technologies that are being developed? How important is patient data to develop them? Do you think they could really revolutionize care? Could Luca explain the point about the problem of AI models trained on EHDS data not being accessible to the wider research community? I didn't quite catch the argument that was being made regarding the limitations it would create for data access. So that's the questions that I have. So back to my speakers, Luca or Magda. Can I ask you to comment on something?
Yeah, I mean, there are many questions here. And again, some of them probably more for Luca, who is the real specialist and ethicist here. But maybe I can explain what I meant when I was talking about dilemma, issue, problem, or dimension. I think that there are certain dimensions like privacy, free choice, etc., which are not really dilemmas, which are just principles and dimensions that we need to take into account when designing a research program, etc. And there are elements where there could be a tension, where society needs to decide, like we've discussed about secondary use of data. There was a big discussion, should that be allowed or not? And if so, under what conditions? So how do we make sure that we protect at the same time the privacy integrity of the person and their data, and at the same time fulfill some societal demands? where, an opt-out might not be, or when the completeness of data is so important. These are the dilemmas that we need to resolve. And I think it's where we have a problem, that we also need to have a candid conversation about it in the public domain, explain, debate, and understand positions so that people understand what's expected from them. I think that's what I meant by difference between dimension and dilemma. But I reckon that it's a little bit artificial.
Yeah. Okay. Luca, over to you.
Yeah, should I answer? Yeah, the question that I've been made concerning the point about AI models. So the issue is that, consider for instance the case of image data that have been analyzed by AI. So the regulation will require this data to be fed into the HDS, so to be made accessible for secondary use, but does not require that the kind of the proprietary model that has analyzed this data is being shared as well. And that might mean that this kind of derived data set that are being made available and accessible through the HDS might actually be hard to kind of interpret or to validate, because we don't have access to the model. So that is the problem of the issue of scientific quality that I think we should account for in this implementation phase of the HDS. It's not enough to have the data. We might also need to have the models in order to make use of of the data. That is in short the kind of argument that I was making about about this.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, as LERU, we've always been pleading for open access, open data, with the right constraints around data also. Of course, there are contracts, there are privacy issues, but this in terms of AI is also knowing what is behind it, right? As scientists, you want to know, what you are basing yourself on, what you're working with. It's sort of like the raw material that you need to have.
Yeah, and also I'm told by experts in the field, by colleagues, that even if we had access to all the training data, I mean, in Europe, we would lack the computational capacity in some cases to actually, redo again, the kind of the analysis. So there is also like a mismatch in terms of the computational capacity that the big companies have, and that actually the European research institutions do not have. So it's again, it's open data might not be enough if we do not have access to the other resources that are needed to make the most of of access to the data.
Yeah, a different issue perhaps, but are there also questions of, what kind of data that we take into account? And are we taking enough of the data that we feed into the models, that feeds into AI, are they based on data that comes everywhere in the world, from what kinds of people, from the north, the south, the east, the west, and also in terms of equality, diversity, and inclusion? Are we including data? Is that being looked at? Is that an issue or not?
Well, if I make like quick answer for the sake of time, yes, it is an issue. So it is definitely a kind of a problem. I think something on which there is increasingly awareness about. But of course, then steps need to be taken to actually have this type of representative of the data set.
I think we didn't discuss today many other dimensions, including diversity, inclusion, etc., in research in general. But I think that's something. How representative are the data that we generate of the real societal situation is really important. So how do we engage people not only in data collection from healthcare systems for AI, but also how do we conduct clinical trials? In the Innovative Health Initiative, we've done a massive project on this in order to see how to engage people who are usually not represented, and what does it mean then for integrity of research, quality of the data, etc. Because there are many issues, ethical dimensions, but scientific and statistical dimensions that need to be taken into account. I think this is something that would require probably a better conversation in the scientific community as well.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a completely, it's a different, we could dedicate a whole different hour to it because
Yeah.
it's also about who gets seen, who gets heard in terms of, we've talked about public debate and so on. But we are about 2 minutes away from closing. I want to ask my speakers if there are any other points in the questions that were asked that they would like to address.
I think some of them had been already
Yeah.
addressed in the conversation, I have the feeling, but happy to address them in writing if needed and to provide answers to.
Yeah. Thank you. And this is
Likewise.
also a call to, if I may, to our audience. If you would like a written response, please feed your contact details into the chat, and we will try to accommodate that. Luca, you wanted to say something?
No, likewise. I mean, it's same as Magda said. So happy to answer questions that could be made by email.
All right, then we are almost out of time, but I would like to go to each of my speakers again to sort of get to those practical takeaways. Do you have any? We've had a very interesting, a very full discussion, but I'm thinking also as a citizen, okay, what do I do with this? I'm thinking as somebody who works with universities, okay? Universities need to develop some guidelines, I've heard. But what are your practical takeaways? And you can address them to whoever you think needs to hear it, whether it's maybe at the EU level or other regulators or companies or researchers.
I'm happy to start because I think that there is something that can be done at institutional level within the research organization, and there is something that we need to collectively do in the debate space as well as in the legislative space. So I think I'll start with very briefly at institutional level. I think we need to make sure that we have those guidances and principles enshrined in our processes, and that we have all the necessary institutional, internal, external controls, and places for internal debate as well. Because let's remember that this debate takes place in the context of the institution as well. So how the evolving science is reflected in the organization, its processes, and the research program. So that's one. The second, very practical to scientists, please do engage in the public debate. I think it's not about telling more about what we know, but engaging into a conversation about the why, the what, and the how of research together with the society, and for the citizens to never be shy and to engage in all the consultations and in the debate as well, although that, as Luca said, might not be enough by itself. And for the regulators, be mindful that the different regulations contradict one another, that there is a lot of complexity by the mere fact that data is regulated by hundreds of different rules and regulations at European level. And the more complexity they create, the more inconsistency and ethical dilemmas that would create as well. So for me, it's a plea for simplification.
Mm-hmm.
I subscribe to all the points that Magda made, all great points. I might add one other, in my role as a kind of as a teacher in in university, dealing with students on a daily basis. I think I want to stress the importance of interdisciplinary in education. As we have seen, the problems that we are facing touches upon different domains, different bodies of expertise. So I think it's important to kind of expose students to a plurality of perspective, disciplinary perspective, know-hows, and approaches. And I think that in the end, by doing so, you'll get better scientists and also better citizens. So that would be my kind of take-home message.
Mm-hmm. Nice. I think that's a very nice note to add at the end. All right. Well, we are already 2 minutes over time. Not that, what is 2 minutes in an eternity, but we do like to keep it to 1 hour as we promised. So that's the end. I think it's been a fascinating discussion. I've learned a lot of things about today, new insights that I didn't know. I hope our readers too. I've noticed that a few of the question posers did add their details that they would like so that we can contact them. We'll try and facilitate that for sure. So I would nothing left to say except to thank not only the viewers for being there and sticking with us, but also to my speakers today for sharing your views and engaging in this discussion with each other. One final thing. Thank you, Esther, my colleague behind the scenes, who has made everything possible. She will be also putting this dialogue on our YouTube channel. So you can go and watch it again or spread the word to others. And I would say thank you. Have a nice day. Stay tuned for a next LERU Talks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And bye-bye.